Art, the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Art has played a big role in gaming culture, since once the idea of a game arises in the developers' minds, they need to make concept art. But today, I want to talk about normal art that is found in the gaming industry, but instead, I'll be talking about pixel art. Pixel art. It is a form of digital art drawn with graphical software where images are built using pixels as the only building blocks. Now you might ask, why would people make games using the pixel art style when we have the 3D ones? Well, my lovely watchers, there are many reasons as to why pixel art is used. Both the developer and the player benefit from the use of pixel art. If a developer makes a game using the pixel art style, it's easier for them to make. Let's say, if two people, one wanting to make a 3D game while the other one wanting to make a pixel art style game, were tasked to make a game about a knight who wields a banana sword and needs to fight a dark wizard who kidnapped his pet frog for no reason, the one that chose to make a 3D game would need to first learn how to sculpt 3D models, animate 3D models and 3D environments, and learn to control the character in the 3-dimensional space, while the other one that decided to make a game with a pixel art style would be able to learn all the 2D equivalents in half the time. Another reason is that the more you go up in graphics, the more your flaws show. Due to the complexity of 3D games nowadays, one simple mistake could ruin the game, which means you'll need to do everything perfect so it can be a good game, while pixel art games aren't as complex and don't need extra tinkering with. I'm not saying it's easy though. Pixel games can also be run easily by people with laptops or desktops that include less powerful components that can handle most 3D games, which benefits the consumer. Pixel art as a term was first coined by Adele Goldberg and Robert Flegel in 1982. I totally butchered those names. Now, pixel art can be divided into different eras. We have the early era, the 8-bit era, the 16-bit era, the downfall, and the revival, shown in big words on the thumbnail, obviously. A lot of these retro pixel games included in the video have been ported to newer consoles, so if you like what you see, go check them out. It all started back in the day, during the early life of gaming, when games weren't as popular as now. The first game to ever be created resembled the classic Pong game. It was made by the physicist William Higginbotham. He made a simple but iconic game where you hit a ball and try to get into the other side's goal. Simple. Another thing that was simple was how it looked. This was the earliest video game to ever be made. But the gaming craze didn't catch on right away, since most people didn't have access to these technologies. Some prominent games that came out during this era were Pong, Barricade, and Tetris. There isn't much to say about this era due to the limitations they had, but just imagine this. If you were alive back then and didn't have access to the gaming knowledge you now possess, how would you react to these old/new, I don't know, creations? Wouldn't you be surprised? After a couple of years, a new era began. This era is now known as the 8-bit era. It included two different generations, the second one and the third one. The second being called the early 8-bit era, and the third one just dubbed as the 8-bit era. There are a few differences between the second and third generation. Most of the notable second generation consoles have joystick controllers, while the third generation included a D-pad for movement and other things. This era contains some of the most beloved consoles. We have the Atari 2600, the Famicom, the Nintendo Entertainment System, and the ST-1000. When we use 8-bit, it doesn't refer to the games but instead the type of processors that were included within the hardware being made during that era. It also refers to the size that can be handled by the hardware. There are many different 8-bit games that most of you have heard about, such as Mega Man 2, Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, Kirby's Adventure, and Ghosts and Goblins. If you notice, 8-bit games have a pattern. The use of colors seems limited. It is obviously better than the early stages of gaming, but as you notice the color schemes, they seem repetitive between each level within their games. Here are two examples. In the famous game that started one of the most popular franchises, I'm talking about Super Mario Bros. If you haven't noticed, we can tell that the game uses the same color palette. When looking at Mario and the mushroom above, you can observe that their colors are indistinguishable. This is just one of the limited color palettes used in Super Mario Bros. The greens on the pipe are the same as the greens on the bush. The blocks on the ground appear to use the same colors as well. Another example of the same color palette is also present within Mega Man for the NES. As you can see, the colors of most things have been used to color other things within the level. The enemy to the left has the same coloring as Mega Man. The entire area we're in consists of the same colored block, and Mega Man's projectile is the same color as the skin. When the 8-bit era alas found its end, a better new era arose. This era was called the 16-bit era. The fourth generation of gaming was a spectacular one. It included hit consoles such as the adored Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES for short, and the Sega Genesis. Now, I mention these two consoles because they were rivals, so much so that Sega outright made a commercial called Genesis Does What Nintendo Don't. Now, 16-bit is essentially 8-bit but bigger and better. Instead of games looking dull, flat, and include out-of-place color schemes, with 16-bit, games looked more polished and seemed more easy largely understandable. There are many 16-bit games that are loved by most of their fanbases. I even wrote a list, let's see. Super Metroid, Super Mario RPG, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Yoshi's Island, Super Mario World, Mortal Kombat 2, Street Fighter 2, and way more I can go on about, but I don't want this video to be an hour long. Obviously, as times went on, hardware got better, resulting in pixel art being less of norm, and three-dimensional graphics taking the cake when it comes to what the gaming community likes. The rise in popularity of the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation resulted in pixel art games not being enjoyed by people, due to there being games that are visually better and sometimes have better mechanics. Another reason is how the 3D environments in these console games were so immersive at its time, compared to what they had. This marked the downfall of pixel art, a time where most developers threw away the idea of pixel art and instead diverted to models. Now, these models weren't as complex as now. Like, they didn't have to animate each strand of the character's hair, but compared to what they had, 2D sprites. This was a real big leap. The only pixel art games that were popular at the time were handheld games. Handhelds like the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced, and the Game Boy SP. The original Game Boy and Game Boy Color were 8-bit processor systems, while the Game Boy Advanced contained a 32-bit processor, but its graphical capabilities were limited to 16 bits. The SP has the same capabilities as the Game Boy Advance. These handhelds were popular during the downfall of pixel art, but at the same time, slowly but surely, the popularity of them dwindled to low numbers. They do have amazing games though. Most games coming out nowadays have 3D visuals, which look gorgeous by the way, but that doesn't mean that games featuring pixel art have died out. In fact, the pixel art style has revived itself. There are a bunch of modern game titles that feature pixel art. These said games are inspired by most of the pixel art games that came out during the old generations of gaming. A lot of these games do take aspects and mechanics from these retro games. These modern pixel art games have also changed and gotten better graphically, just like the 3D games. An example of this is Dead Cells. The way the developers made the animations for the game was by animating it in 3D, and then downscaling it, resulting in the game's pixel animations looking smoother than ever. Octopath Traveler is also another example of pixel art evolving. The game fuses 2D sprites and 3D backgrounds. It also features amazing lighting. The mix between both types makes me wonder, how would pixel art games look like in the future? There are also some other modern pixel art styled games that I feel like you guys will enjoy. Shovel Knight Dig, Terraria, Hyper Light Drifter, Blasphemous, Enter the Gungeon, Katana Zero. Now, we have finally reached the present on the timeline. But don't worry folks, the future looks brighter than it has ever been. Oh, and thanks for all the support you guys have given me on my videos. A lot of you guys have commented some really nice and supportive comments. I appreciate it so much. I hope I continue to make content that all of you will enjoy. We also reached 200 subs. Woohoo! Again, I thank you all. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm Joker, signing off.